Good afternoon. Welcome along to the second session in today's Room of Reflection at Learning Technologies 2015. My name's Kate Graham. I head up the social media for the conference, and I'm delighted to be able to welcome you along to this second session today. We're going to be talking about effective workplace learning, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Nigel Payne. Thank you very much for coming along, sparing the time for us today.
Really glad to be here.
So Nigel has been involved in corporate training for over 20 years, my notes say. He has produced learning software, award-winning multimedia materials, and worked with organisations including the BBC. Now, I've taken all of this information off the back of his new book. So this is a shameless plug. The Learning Challenge, dealing with technology, innovation, and change in learning and development. So you were signing some copies at lunchtime, I believe, Nigel. So there's a lot of interest in the book.
Amazing amount of interest. Thank you, Kate.
Good.
Much more than I thought there would be.
Good. There's the plug out the way. We were going to have a pile here, but we only had one left. So so there you go. That's how popular it is. But this area of effective workplace learning, it's really important, and it's something that a lot of the sessions have touched on, including yours this morning. And Sugata Mitra mentioned this morning about these sort of self-organized learning environments that he is a big fan of, the hole in the wall, etc. But they exist on the edge of chaos, was his direct quote, and that's something that kind of stuck in my mind this morning. But obviously the world of work has to be fairly well organized in order for it to run properly. So do you think that we're being slow to adapt to some of the changing trends and some of the innovations we're seeing in the workplace and therefore learning, because that kind of old model, the Victorian from the Empire, structure and discipline, it's a lot easier to manage, isn't it?
It is, but I don't think it's like that kind of binary flip. Sugata started by saying that, let me quote if I can get it right, schools enable empire, schools are now obsolete because we have no empire. Now, if you took 100 people and asked them how many think schools are obsolete, i.e. that they will disappear in 5 years, how many would say, definitely, yeah. Not many. Maybe not even Sugata. You know, I'd love to know what schools his kids go to. I bet they don't go to schools in the cloud, for example. But how many people would therefore, of that 100, say, everything he says about learning is invalidated because I disagree with that presumption that schools are obsolete? No one would say that either. So I think that what we've got to do in corporate learning is steal stuff from outside, change where we can, but also be pragmatic. And I think the great idealistic learning leader who goes in with a view to smashing everything up and completely changing the paradigm is probably unemployed currently. The learning leader who goes in and says, nothing is ever going to change, the way we do it is perfect, I need all 633 of my staff, and we will do it all face-to-face in exactly the way we did it 10 years ago, is probably also unemployed. So the real winners are those who learn, listen, look, and say, what can we take from that? So if you take that learning environment that he was talking about, there's a lot you could do there in terms of engendering innovation and creativity in organizations. One definition of creativity is ideas on the edge of chaos. That's why you're creative, because you're just pulling back from the brink and you're coming up with things that you never thought of before. So I think there are models that you can use. There are ideas that you have to take forward. There are issues that should challenge you and make you reconsider your practice. But that doesn't mean we chuck away the baby with the bathwater and say, well, you know, the guy who was speaking before me was from Lloyd's Bank. No, it would be career limiting to say, let's live on the edge of chaos. You know, they did that a few years ago and it didn't do them too well. No, so pragmatic, you know, I'm a great believer in being pragmatic and also recognizing the world that real people who are in learning, in corporate learning, live in. You know, I read a blog once saying, you know, wake up, smell the coffee, the future is social learning. Yep, I accept that. I think social learning is unbelievably important, but the person who wrote that blog had never worked for a corporate organization. You go in there, you work within the constraints of what corporates are trying to do, and you do your best. And some of them have bigger barriers, higher walls, more difficulty. Some have fewer constraints and fewer restrictions, and you work accordingly. But the whole point is you move forward. That what it's like at the beginning of 2015 is different at the end of 2015. You need a vision, you need to know the kind of direction that you think is important, you need to make choices as a learning leader and say, I'm going to go with that, but I'm not going to go with that. and you see what happens. So it's a kind of chemical process.
Yeah, and it's
not an
iterative,
absolute
isn't
one. It is iterative.
Yeah.
Some things, thank goodness, some things fail, and you learn from those.
Yeah.
And to have the courage to admit that that was an absolute disaster. Look it in the eyes and say something succeed. We'll do a bit more of that. Because as well as developing learning, you're actually developing the workforce. You're helping people adapt to what they consider work to be. And one of the biggest problems, the biggest barriers, is not miserable learning people, horrible LMSs, vile chief executives. The problem is the ordinary workforce, who in many instances go, that looks boring, why should I do that? I'm not interested. You have to take them with you. And you have to, I hope that's not a symbolic collapse of my book, you have to take them with you and grow them as you expand, and create an environment where they feel really excited about not just learning, but about working for that particular organization and getting the benefit of that organization, of being motivated and energized and organized. All those things are big issues for most organizations. And Rome was not built in a day, and Lloyd's was not transformed in a day, or a year, or 5 years, or 30 years even. Yeah, exactly. But that doesn't mean it's not valid.
No.
So that's what I would say, is that we take what we can, we do the best we can, but we have some vision and some ideas. And that's what, to just say it about the book, that a lot of it is about the pragmatic stuff that you've got to get on top of. Things like impact measurement, things like learning design and instructional design, things like performance consulting and performance management. All of those things are really important day-to-day things. But at the end of the book, there are 3 game changers: neuroscience, learning analytics, and technology. So in some ways, you've got to live in both worlds. You've got to do the right thing pragmatically, move forward, get better. But you've also got to have the big idea of what's going to happen 2 years down the track, 3 years down the track, 5 years down the track. That's what it's about now. It's a difficult, hard role.
Yeah.
So is working in most organizations now. It gets harder.
And it's interesting, you talk about the workforce, because obviously L&D are up against, there's so many barriers, and you've talked about a lot of the different challenges. And one of the things you just mentioned is a kind of big theme is that of neuroscience. And it's kind of not just organizations and society and all of these things that change. We're changing, aren't we? And the way that we process information and we learn. And that's a huge challenge for L&D.
It's a massive challenge. And one of the big problems is that for some people, their brain isn't changing, and that's an even bigger problem, because they're falling behind, they're not adapting. There was an example, someone I was working in a very large company with maintenance engineers, and they thought they'd really get knowledge sharing and start to engage their maintenance workforce. They gave them all iPads, and 1 month later, half of the workforce gave their iPads back and said, no thanks, don't want this stuff. I couldn't understand a word of it, don't know what the point of this is. So you've got a big barrier to overcome, because what you want is their brains to develop and to continue to try new things and try things in different ways. And giving their iPads back was not a good first step on the road. And
do you think that technology has played a role in changing the way that we do develop and we do process information?
Everyone quotes Steve Jobs, but at his funeral oration, Jonathan Ive told a story about Steve Jobs, and he said that Jobs came into the design office one morning and said, "What's the most efficient animal in the world? What animal in terms of watts per calorie? What is it? What is it? What is it?" And I think the answer was, no one knew, of course. He said, "It's a jaguar, 15 times more effective than a human being in terms of watts per calorie, right?" He said, "Yep, okay." And he said, "What about a human being on a bicycle?" And everyone went, "Yeah." And he said, "More efficient than a jaguar, more efficient in watts per calorie than a jaguar. What do you think about that?" And everyone's going, "Interesting, Steve." Then he said, can't you see, we're building bicycles for the mind." And in many ways, that's what it is all about. It's about doing things faster, more efficiently, more effectively, getting more out of each brain calorie that we burn. And that turns everything upside down. Because just like your whole, if you get on a bike, your whole perspective of if you were only walking previously, your whole world grows. Your whole world grows.
Yeah.
You get a computer or an iPad or whatever, your whole world grows. And for people who are not in there, it's scary because as we're evolving to cope with that profusion of data, of trying to make sense of a more complex world, there are people outside that. And that scares me a lot.
And do you think, L&D is scared of some of these changes that are happening, or is it, we talk about being pragmatic and you're confined? Is that a little bit of an excuse sometimes? Is it that actually we are a little bit scared, or can we embrace it somehow? Can we break out and actually embrace some of this stuff?
It's true. If I had £1 for every time someone said to me, Nigel, I'm a face-to-face trainer, and you cannot tell me that you can replace me with some stupid screen. All the way that I operate, my skill, my experience, my knowledge, you just can't tell me that. It's just not going to happen in my organization as they get made redundant 6 months later. So yeah, I think a lot of people who, it's partly fear, it's partly mindset. That part of what learning should be doing is breaking mindsets. And mindsets hold organizations back, but also equally within learning, mindsets hold learning back. If you've got a paradigm locked in your head about what effective learning is, then you are in for a shock. And if you don't change that, you're in for being obsolete. Because there was that guy recently, I've forgotten his name, it's the new secretary of the Head Teachers Association, put out this blog post last week or the week before saying, if we stop wasting money on iPads in schools, we could put in 420 extra teachers. Now, when you put it like that, it's obvious, isn't it? And I said, no, not obvious at all. Teachers teach, iPads help you learn. There could be way more value in however many thousand iPads, 10,000 of iPads that buys than 420 teachers. It's the balance again. And if he's got this mindset that all technology is frivolous and a waste of time, there's only one way that is good. Now, the fact that he's head of the Head Teachers Association frightens the hell out of me. And I would hate to be in his school. I would hate to be a teacher in his school. It would be absolutely excruciating. The guy is Neanderthal. He doesn't understand things.
And it's interesting. I mean, I was downstairs in the exhibition, and I just attended one of the seminars that were down there, and they said at the beginning, how many people are familiar with the 70-20-10 model? And everyone would put their hand up, but no, and it was about half the audience. And obviously 70-20-10, it's not a panacea as we know, but obviously there is something in that, bringing the informal in and changing some of that approach. So you think, well, if only half the people in that audience of 100 people are even aware of it, there's quite a long road to go down, isn't there?
There is a long tail. It's true. And for every time you go into a company and you see some amazing stuff and you think, my goodness, this is fabulous, there are 5 companies you go in and weep because they haven't got beyond the 1950s. And that's a good example. Again, I think 70-20-10 is a mindset issue. Once you get it in your head that you can amplify the power of the learning instant by linking it to other kinds of learning opportunities and other learning challenges, and link it to informal learning and link it to networks of expertise, then you kind of get it. And that is a very powerful moment of insight. So I don't care how you do it, and I would not get into any debate with anyone about, is it really 70-20-10? Who cares? It's a mindset issue, and it's about amplification of the impact of learning. And when you say that, I say to people when they go, oh, well, I don't really believe in all this stuff. And I say, you don't want to amplify the impact of your learning. You want the biggest, highest resonance possible. Of course I do. You're on the conversation. Not, right? We're on the conversation. But yes, you're right. There's a long way to go. And I wake up in the morning and think, don't get over yourself. Don't think that the world. I've turned this world around. It's all fantastic. No, it's not. There's still work to do.
So as we move towards some of the more informal approaches, the 70-20-10, etc., what do you think are some of the fundamental changes that L&D, folk watching this or attending events like this, can sort of start to do? What does kind of ground zero look like for an L&D pro in their job?
I think the biggest stuff is, and almost the most difficult to accept, is that learning isn't the province of L&D. And that's quite a big statement.
Interesting one,
What that means is that you need to enable learning happening everywhere all over the organization. It needs to bubble up wherever it needs to bubble up. And if you try and control it, quality standardize it, force it through a particular design framework, give it a number, give it a name, give it a process, you'll kill it. And that doesn't mean that there isn't learning that emanates out of L&D. There are big things that need to be done. But essentially, let learning evolve, let it go.
In a Frozen style.
Exactly, exactly. And I'm not going to sing. No, we're not going to burst into song. Although my two little granddaughters on New Year's Eve, they went to a Frozen sing-along.
Oh my goodness.
So where they put the words on the screen, and I thought, I'm so lucky not to be their mother, having to sit through that. That would be.
No, we're not having the room of karaoke.
We're not going to do that. So it's understanding that the contribution that everyone can make to learning in an organisation is by definition massively greater than if you try and control it in one little unit or group or individual even.
And how do you think you go about that if you're in a large organisation? There's lots of teams, there's lots of silos. How do you go about sort of breaking some of that out? Do you just sort of start to open the doors, as it were, of the L&D department? If you imagine it as a room or some corridors, and the doors just open up. How do you sort of start branching out and embracing? Because obviously the learning is happening. If you take a web development team, for example, that there's a group of people stereotypically that will do a lot of informal learning. They'll get stuff online. They'll learn bits and pieces of code as they need to. So they're all off in the technical department. L&D sat over here. Obviously, all the other departments are around. How do you, if you're the L&D pro, how do you then sort of go about opening those doors metaphorically?
I wish I could be Sugata Mitra. I do not know. I'll come back in a month.
See how they get on, yeah.
See how you get on.
Okay.
You're there. You're actually answering the question, in posing the question. But you need to understand what's actually going on. You start from where you are. You start from where people are. You start from small initiatives. You listen. You get out of your little cubbyhole. And you go into the organisation, and usually you'll be astonished at what's going on. So you draw attention to that. You look at what can be, what's perfect for this group that probably won't go anywhere else, and what could be wonderfully expanded across the whole organisation. And that's how you work. So you work slowly with a bit of humility, definitely listening and understanding, and trying to understand where the roadblocks are and trying to undo the roadblocks. So that kind of enabling framework, I'll enable that to happen. I won't actually run it or do it.
I'm putting a bit of an explorer hat on.
Yes, exactly. And learn from the rest of the organisation. Yeah. And if that's not so good, learn from other organisations. So have a plan and have a vision, really. If you have got an idea in your head about what you would like this place to be in 1 or 2 years' time, then you work out what the most productive baby steps, and take publicity as well. Really. There's some questions coming through.
Yeah, we have got some questions coming through.
Firstly, there's a statement from Andy Cree that says, surely L&D departments need to realise the sooner they are seen as playing a key role in supporting an organisation's culture, the sooner the leaders in that organisation embrace the new developments that they are suggesting, and L&D must be seen as adding true value. But the question by Gareth is, I think many in L&D are, like the title of your event says, challenged by learning today. I'm not sure this is a very helpful mindset. Given a choice, what word, Nigel, would you like to use instead?
Challenge. Well, can I just pick up with Andy first, because I totally agree with him. I've always said that I think L&D should make a play for owning culture in the organisation. I think that's very, very important. And I also think that challenge isn't a bad word. I understand why he's saying it's not a good word, because it's a kind of negative word. But I think that everybody should take on challenges at work. I don't care who they are, where they come from, including learning. And I think that if I had a small learning team, I'd sit down with them maybe once a month and say, what are the challenges we're facing? Who's going to own that? Who can go and find out about this? Go and do things which are difficult, tricky, uncomfortable, and embrace them. Just try to get on top of it. And at the end of it, you may have beaten the challenge by saying, I don't need to worry about that. Or you've beaten the challenge by saying, there's real stuff we have to do now. So I think challenge isn't such a bad word. And there's a difference between taking on a challenge and being challenged. Being challenged, it seems to be a kind of negative expression. But I think taking on the challenge, embracing the challenge, is actually very positive and very good. and it's extremely good for your brain to not just rest on everything you know, but to start to work on things you don't know. So in some ways, L&D has to learn. You know, it has to be exemplary learners, and sometimes they're not. Yep.
That leads us on to another question that Don asked, which is kind of, you may have just answered it there. It said, what one thing would you do, Nigel, to suggest that what one thing would you suggest that we do to help ourselves tackle the current challenges that we're facing in L&D? And you've just said that we should do stuff, you know, just put yourself out there.
Yes,
have you got an answer for that?
But also, it shouldn't be on your own. That you don't have to solve the world's problems as a mighty individual effort. There are people who will help. And often, L&D's lonely. One of the reasons we set up CLO Connect in LPI was that perception that often very small teams, or often you're in London and the main team is in Dallas or Frankfurt or somewhere else. So I like to say, you know, get some scouts and hunters and get a posse around you. Find like-minded people and say, can we do this together? Get networking, read stuff. You can tweet, blog. You'll get a group around you. And if you ask questions, many people will help. And if you continue to ask for it, say, right, I understand that, but I'm not quite sure about this, people will come with you. And you end up on your own kind of learning journey and not feeling like you're isolated. For example, take something like measure the impact of learning in this organization or you're fired. And that's, I'm taking an extreme, but I've actually heard people have been told that, you get this right or you go. Many take that as I have to solve this problem. You don't. You can say, I need to work on this, who can help? Anyone got anyone got ideas and suggestions? Are there books I should read? You'll get a community of people who will support you.
It's that personal learning network. I know a lot
of
attendees
your personal learning
at the the event would and say, you know, the great thing about coming to events is obviously being able to reach out and touch someone, as it were, that you know online. But equally, you know, there are people here that speak to each other every day through one community or another, and are great support for themselves.
Well, I'm reading Amanda Palmer, who's she's a rock star. She's called AFP. I won't tell you what the F stands for. And Amanda Palmer's just written a book called Learning How to Ask. And it's true. We just don't know how to ask. We're quite good at telling, but we don't know how to ask.
Do you think that's a British thing? Or do you think that's
yes, it is kind of. I think we're more reticent. Polite, but on the other hand, in many corporate environments, loss of face is very important. You don't want to lose face. You don't want to admit that you're not actually on top of every single element of this. So we create this illusion that we're all powerful, all knowing. And so it doesn't matter where you come from, which nationality, it's hard to ask. But asking is learning, as far as I'm concerned. And you set yourself up to, everyone should be saying, right, these are my 2 or 3 massive learning challenges. Who can help me?
And it's something, I mean, we had a new graduate start with us on Monday, and he's asked me loads of questions, and I'd be, even in 3 days, and I'd be concerned if he hadn't have asked me any questions. And it's something we do very early on in our careers and when we start a job, but not later on. But then the challenges keep coming. You never really master a job, do you?
No, you don't.
But you almost, like you say, you just stop asking questions. I think that's a really good message.
And so when you join an organisation, there's a teeny period where it's okay to ask questions, but very soon
you've got to be competent.
You've got to be absolutely competent by this time. Don't ask any more questions. There's something wrong with that, because out of questions, massive amounts of learning comes.
Yeah. Definitely. Is there any more questions
from afar? Here from Tracy Tutt, and it says, what advice would Nigel give to change that mindset and get over those blockers?
Which ones in particular? The ones about not learning, not going out there? I think for me, the key is people, not technology or machine. Technology enables that. But if you get into a network and you find even a small number of like-minded people and just talk honestly and openly, and I think that is a fabulous way of just recognizing that we're in a world where we all pretend that we're way better and know way more and have done a lot more than we really have. And that bit of honesty is incredibly powerful, I think. So I would find some people
And don't fake it till you make it.
And don't fake it till you make it. That's exactly right. Don't fake it. There may be people where you have to fake it, fine, but there's also times when you need to be authentic and clear. And read stuff. You know, there's so many really interesting books out there that are written by people, you know, way smarter and more competent than me. And if you take on a target of reading even one book a month for a year, that can be life-changing if you pick the right books. And I don't believe that's a really hard thing to do. 20 minutes a day.
And I guess we are in the room of reflection, and
yes.
I guess that is, you know, doing that reading. We were talking about mindfulness before we started. Yes. It is that break from, even if you are reading on some sort of device, yes. It is that break and that stopping and thinking and having that bit of headspace, yes. Isn't it? Which we don't really give ourselves day to day. Everybody's so busy.
It's also a fundamental part of learning, reflection.
Yeah.
And again, we pack in the content and forget about the reflection. So yeah, build in reflection in your life as well as in your learning. It's incredibly important. And even 5 minutes, you just sit down and say, if you're reading a book, what am I getting out of this? Is there anything I could apply? Is there anything useful I could do with it? That 5 minutes is incredibly valuable.
Do you think that needs to be built into corporate learning
yes,
somehow?
Yes, I certainly do.
Because it isn't like that, is it?
No, it isn't. It's all content.
Download the resource.
Yeah, that's right. It's like any minute wasted with content. And we know full well that we have cognitive resilience is like stamina. We run out of it. So if you force people again and again, hour after hour, their ability to retain and engage just goes down to the point where they're just there, but they're not there.
Yeah.
And to build in variety, moving around, different forms of learning, questioning, thinking quietly, working out together what we're getting out of this, what we need to know more of, makes the learning so much more effective. And it doesn't take any more time and doesn't cost one halfpenny more. I don't care whether it's online or face-to-face or in simulation or on Twitter. I don't care. You still need to build in that entire process to go from the rational prefrontal cortex right through the limbic system in the brain. That's how we really learn. That's how it gets embedded. Learning is not a rational process. It's actually an emotional process. And we forget that. We've forgotten that over the centuries. But we know best. Our best learning is when we're really engaged.
Yeah, it's that old empire model again, isn't it? It's sitting on the desk and having it drilled into you.
Yes.
So, well, I think that is a really nice point to leave it on. And I think that element of reflection in corporate learning is something that perhaps people could take away as quite a practical step as well, and just think about how could I give my learners a bit of headspace? How could I build that into what I'm doing as well? Yeah. So thank you very much for your time, Nigel. We've had a great time, and thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thanks a lot, Kate.
Cheers.